Yes, hello, it's Spooky Lake Month where we do 31 days of haunted hydrology. Today I want to talk about Alaska and one of the worst ways you can die. The Cook Inlet stretches over 180 miles from the Gulf of Alaska to the city of Anchorage. This inlet has some of the largest tides in the world, ranging from 18 to 36 feet. As the tide recedes, it leaves behind miles upon miles of mud. Low tides last around 6 hours, but when the high tide returns, it returns extremely quickly. So fast that people can actually ride the boar tide as it enters the inlet. The mud during low tide is incredibly deceptive. One minute it's as solid as a asphalt road, and the next it's like walking through jello. Horrifying, drawn-out deaths have occurred in the mud. In 1988, a young woman who was visiting Alaska got stuck in the mud with her husband. Her husband was able to escape the muddy suction, and he spent the next 3 hours trying to rescue his wife. As the tide started to come in, he left to get help. By the time people arrived back at the scene, the frigid water was up to her neck. They gave her a tube so she could continue to breathe, but the hypothermia was already setting in as the water rushed around her. Her frozen fingers were no longer able to hold the tube for air, and eventually she drowned. It wasn't until 6 hours later that they were able to retrieve her body, still encased in the mud. Her experience is not dissimilar from the hundreds of accidents that occur at Cook Inlet each year, and while not all those instances end with death, they're all a race against time. As recently as May of this year, a young man who was only 20 got trapped in the mud and eventually drowned. But what causes this oobleck-like composition of this specific mud? Cook Inlet is surrounded by glaciers, and their enormous weight is grinding mechanically against the bedrock beneath the ice. The result is this incredibly fine silt that's called glacial flour, and it's carried to the inlet through waterways and the tide, resulting in hundreds of miles of deadly mud. Take one wrong step and you might be trapped for good. 9 out of 10 spookies.